A homeless man walks into a luxury bank. The bank manager mocks him ridiculously. Seconds later, the entire system goes into lockdown. A teller's screen flashes a code only billion-dollar executives ever trigger, and the manager panics, then accuses the man of hacking the bank. Security moves in, customers start filming, and the homeless stranger can't remember why everyone is terrified of him, until someone storms in who does. Quick pause. Tap subscribe to help the channel grow. And comment where you're watching from so the video reaches more people. Thank you. Now, back to the story. Excuse me, sir. I'd like to check my account. George Thompson's voice was soft, tremulous, carrying the weight of 60 years and a mind fraying at the edges. He shuffled into the Argent Trust Bank, pushing a squeaky metal cart that smelled faintly of rain-soaked cardboard and street dust. His rags hung loose on his thin frame, threadbare layers clinging awkwardly over bones that had long felt the chill of winter nights. Hair matted with grime, shoes scuffed and cracked, George looked entirely out of place among the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the bank's grand lobby. A cluster of customers paused mid-step, wrinkling noses and muttering under their breath. A young teller behind the counter leaned forward and whispered to a colleague, "Why is he here?" George stepped closer to the counter, holding out a crumpled slip of paper. His hands shook, not just with age but with the nervous energy of someone who had wandered 1,000 streets and forgotten almost everything except this fragment of memory. I used to have an account here, a long time ago," he said softly, barely audible over the ambient hum of air conditioning and quiet conversation. At that moment, manager William Brow appeared, tall and impeccably dressed, his tailored tan suit and perfectly knotted tie signaling wealth, control, and authority. He stopped short, eyes scanning George up and down as if sizing up a stray animal. Then he laughed. Loud, booming, echoing across the polished marble lobby. "Check your account?" William's voice carried sharp disbelief. "This is a bank, not a shelter." Laughter rippled among the nearby customers. One wealthy-looking man called out from behind, "Get him out of here!" A security guard shifted closer to the counter, hand instinctively brushing the holster at his hip. Every eye in the room followed George like he had just committed some unspeakable crime. George didn't flinch. He didn't shout or beg. His voice remained low, measured. He unfolded the crumpled scrap of paper, revealing faded numbers that had survived decades of disuse. I just want to check my account. That's all." William Brow leaned forward, mockery dripping from every word. "Look at you," he sneered. "Clothes falling apart, hair like a bird's nest, smelling like you crawled out of a gutter. Do you expect anyone here to take you seriously?" His tone carried a casual cruelty, a mixture of classist disdain and barely concealed racial prejudice. "This isn't a soup kitchen. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." George's hands gripped the paper tighter. He tried to keep his composure, though a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. I had this account before. I think I—" William interrupted with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Think? You think? Listen, son, we deal with real customers here, not street ghosts who wander in asking for imaginary money." Customers giggled or whispered to one another. Some even recorded the scene on their phones, delighted by the spectacle of humiliation. George's cart squeaked as he shifted, the sound unbearably loud in the tense air. A young teller, her lip pressed thin in annoyance, reluctantly reached for the paper George had handed him. He typed the numbers slowly, hesitating with each keystroke. When he finally hit enter, the monitor flashed violently. The screen locked. A warning blinked red, letters screaming across the display. Executive priority. CEO access only. The teller froze mid-breath, staring at the screen as if it had grown fangs. His face drained of color. He whispered urgently to a colleague, who leaned over, eyes wide with shock. Together, they looked at the numbers again, then called for William Brow. William arrived quickly, impatiently brushing past the murmuring crowd. He glanced at the screen, raised a single brow, and then laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. CEO access, he said, voice laced with incredulity. You've obtained this account fraudulently. That's the only explanation. Call security. Now. The guard stepped forward, hand ready on his baton, while other customers whispered, gawked, or held up phones to capture the unfolding scene. The lobby, once quiet and orderly, descended into chaos. Voices clashed, murmurs became shouts, and the tension thickened like fog. George's fingers shook as he tried to speak, fragments of thought spilling out. I didn't. I used to. His words faltered under the weight of confusion, Alzheimer's creeping into the edges of his memory. His schizophrenia made each sound in the crowded room reverberate with extra intensity. Every laugh, every whisper felt amplified. But William Brow was relentless. I don't care what you used to do. You're a fraud. Security, restrain him. He's not leaving until headquarters verifies this, whatever it is. The guards moved closer, and George's body trembled visibly. He rocked slightly on his feet, unsure whether to flee or remain. His eyes darted from teller to manager, from the luxury marble floors to the gleaming chandeliers above, taking in a world he had once inhabited differently, long ago, before life had stripped him down to rags and uncertainty. Phones were raised. Whispers grew louder. The lobby had become a cage of judgment, curiosity, and fear. George Thompson, the frail old man, stood at the center, trembling, a solitary figure of dignity under siege. Then the commotion swelled even further. The metallic squeak of his cart, the shuffle of guards, the harsh tone of William Brow, all combined into a tension so dense it seemed it could snap at any moment. And in the midst of it, George's frail voice broke through, barely audible, yet resolute. I want to see my account. The words hung in the air, fragile and defiant, as the guards closed in. George's knuckles whitened on the paper, his heart pounding in fear and anticipation. Chaos reigned. The polished marble lobby, meant to reflect order and control, now mirrored only confusion, accusation, and imminent revelation. And George Thompson, trembling but unbowed, stood at the threshold of a truth the world was not yet ready to see. William Brow's eyes narrowed as he folded his arms, stepping closer to the trembling George. Obtained something you shouldn't have, is that it? He barked, voice carrying authority across the now tense lobby. No one walks in here, dressed like that, and triggers a CEO-level alert without foul play. Security, restrain him. He's a threat. End of discussion. The young teller who had entered the numbers, hands still hovering over the keyboard, spoke up hesitantly. Sir, that warning only appears for top-level executives. It's a CEO-exclusive code. Perhaps this is a mistake. Maybe it should be handled discreetly, calmly. William waved the protest away as if swatting at a fly. Excuses. Lies. Don't tell me how the system works. This man has fraudulently obtained access, plain and simple. Someone grab him. Now. A murmur spread through the lobby. Customers began pulling out phones, capturing every moment. Laughter and whispers blended with gasps of shock. The spectacle intensified. George's mind, already fragile from decades of wandering and illness, began to unravel. The sounds of the lobby collided with the memories, or half-memories, that flickered through his mind. Where am I? He thought, heart hammering. Why is everyone shouting? I just wanted to see my account, my office. No, that's not right. George tried to speak, but the words tumbled out in fragments, incoherent to anyone but himself. I worked here. I think. I used to. His voice cracked, rising with desperation as security moved closer. The metallic sheen of their badges, the firm grip on their batons, the cold expressions, everything pressed down on him like a weight he could not name. William leaned forward, a sneer spreading across his face. You used to what? Cheat a CEO? Claim what isn't yours? You think anyone here cares about your stories? You look homeless, you act confused, so you must be guilty. Isn't that convenient? His words dripped with contempt, echoing off the marble walls. The crowd surged. Phones hovered in every direction, recording the scene, whispering commentary, the faint click of cameras punctuating the chaos. George's body swayed slightly, rocking back and forth, overwhelmed by the cacophony. The memory fragments he clung to splintered further. He remembered offices, boardrooms, people in suits, papers stacked neatly, pens he could once hold with authority, but it all dissolved into the present, loud and hostile, where everyone saw a trembling homeless man and no one recognized a CEO. Sir, please. I didn't. George began, voice shaky. I just wanted to check my. His words stumbled over themselves, each phrase collapsing under the weight of William's accusations. Check your account? William scoffed loudly. No, you're trying to access something that isn't yours. I've been in banking for decades. I know fraud when I see it. Security, move him. Let's see how he explains this one when he's in cuffs. One of the tellers began shaking, whispering to another, I think he's telling the truth. The system. Maybe we should handle this quietly. William snapped, cutting the protest short. Quiet. I don't care what the system says. This man is a criminal until proven otherwise. The guards approached George cautiously, attempting to encircle him. Each step sent a shiver through his body. His vision blurred. Faces and voices collided into each other. Memory and reality tangled. I built this. Where am I? George stumbled back a step, cart squeaking harshly against the marble floor. I used to work here. His voice was almost a whisper, drowned out by William's booming declarations. A customer gasped audibly, another chuckled nervously, and a third whispered, Call the police already. The noise grew, a rising tide of judgment and curiosity, pressing in from all sides. George's heart raced, each pulse echoing in his ears like a drumbeat of fear. The young teller who had entered the numbers tried again to intervene. Sir, really, he didn't. This is a mistake. It should be handled discreetly. Silence! William snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. Enough excuses. Do your jobs. Security, get him. George flinched as two guards closed in. His hands, still clutching the crumpled scrap of paper, trembled violently. He rocked back and forth, trying to make sense of a world that no longer recognized him. His schizophrenia and Alzheimer's created an internal storm. Thoughts looped and shattered. Where are the meetings, the boardroom, the people, the office? The commotion, the shouting, the crowd, the clashing sounds of accusation, all of it built into a crescendo that drew attention beyond the immediate lobby. A shadow appeared at the far end of the bank, a figure tall and sharply dressed, moving purposefully toward the center of the chaos. Every eye followed him, though most assumed he was another manager or a security officer. But something in his posture, in the way he scanned the room, suggested he wasn't there for routine protocol. His pace cut through the chaos, deliberate, eyes fixed. George didn't notice. His attention was consumed by the fear radiating from William, the guards, the murmuring crowd. His mind scrambled desperately to connect fragments of memory, to find some thread that explained why everyone was against him, why the walls he once knew seemed so alien. The new figure stepped closer, and the whispers began to change, slightly, imperceptibly at first. People noticed a calm authority, a presence that didn't belong to anyone in the lobby's hierarchy. The chatter stilled, eyes shifted. Something significant had arrived. George's hands tightened around the paper. He rocked slightly, unsure whether to retreat or stay rooted, as a sense of tension hung in the air heavier than before. The moment felt like a threshold, the cusp between confusion and revelation, between accusation and the truth. The bank lobby, once a symbol of order and wealth, had become a stage. And at its center stood a frail old man, trembling, holding the last fragment of a life nearly erased, while the chaos around him seemed ready to break entirely. A ripple of movement at the far end of the lobby drew every eye. The murmurs of customers and the shouted commands of guards seemed to falter for a moment as a tall, sharply dressed man strode past the throng. His dark suit was impeccable, pressed and clean, with polished shoes that clicked against the marble floors. His posture was confident, measured, every step deliberate, as though he knew precisely where he needed to be. Jonathan Hale, internal auditor for Dominion Financial Group headquarters, had come to Argent Trust Bank that morning for a routine compliance inspection, a surprise visit, meant to ensure the branch followed protocol to the letter. He had not expected chaos, nor the spectacle of a trembling old man being accused in front of every customer for triggering a CEO-level account alert. Hearing the shouting, he quickened his pace, weaving through the crowd. He caught snippets of words: fraud, thief, CEO access, and something inside him tightened. A familiar dread coiled in his stomach. He reached the center of the lobby, and the first thing he saw was George Thompson, hunched over, cart squeaking under his weight, hands clutching the crumpled slip of paper like a talisman against the world. Jonathan froze. His eyes locked on George's face. The lines, the gray hair, the wary eyes. Something about the frail man's posture, the way he held himself despite the fear radiating off him, struck a chord in Jonathan's memory. A flashback hit him suddenly, sharply, a confidential bulletin from headquarters, printed weeks ago and marked urgent. Missing executive, George Thompson, CEO of Dominion Financial Group. Last known whereabouts, unknown. Considered vulnerable. Approach with caution. Any sighting must be reported immediately. The paper had warned of his disappearance, the months of fruitless searches, the anxious meetings in high-rise boardrooms over missing leadership. And now here he was, standing, or trembling, right in front of him, mistaken for a street wanderer, accused of fraud by the very employees who owed him allegiance. Jonathan didn't pause to think. He barked sharply toward the approaching security officers. Stop! Stand down! Now! Guards hesitated, uncertain at first, then obeyed. William Brow, still hovering over George with a smug mixture of authority and disbelief, looked up. "What is this?" he asked nervously, the laughter he had relied on earlier now faltering. Jonathan fixed him with a piercing gaze. "What have you done?" William chuckled nervously, trying to dismiss it. I don't. This man triggered a CEO-level alert. This man, Jonathan interrupted, voice tight with anger and disbelief, is George Thompson, CEO of Dominion Financial Group. And you have been threatening him in your branch lobby. William's face drained of color, the bravado slipping like sand through fingers. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stammered, as though unsure whether to laugh or protest. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, eyes widening, phones lowering, whispers ceasing. The tension that had been a drumbeat in the lobby now became a frozen heartbeat of collective realization. Jonathan stepped closer to the counter, where the teller still stood, frozen mid-gesture, eyes wide and hands shaking. "Access the screen," Jonathan ordered, gesturing toward the locked monitor. The teller swallowed nervously but complied. Jonathan entered his high-level credentials with precision, the keyboard clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden hush. Instantly, the screen responded. Files and folders opened, displaying internal communications, bank account details, executive profiles, everything George had once overseen. And at the top, highlighted in bold, were personal records confirming George Thompson's identity as CEO. The entire bank went silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not a whisper. Customers gawked, mouths opening and closing, unable to form words. Staff froze mid-motion, faces blanching, realizing the enormity of their error. Even the guards hesitated, hands hovering uncertainly over their batons. Jonathan knelt beside George, his voice lowered, gentle but firm. "Mr. Thompson, sir, we've been searching for you for months. You're safe now. You're home." George's hands tightened on the crumpled paper. His eyes flickered from the screen to Jonathan, then around the lobby. The chaos, the accusations, the fear, all of it collided in a single moment. He trembled violently, but there was something in the auditor's calm authority that allowed him to exhale, if only slightly. A low, incredulous murmur passed through the crowd. A wealthy customer whispered to the person next to him, "That's the CEO?" The words sounded absurd in the air, but the screens and Jonathan's presence confirmed it. William Brow stepped back, suddenly smaller, his mouth opening and closing without forming a coherent defense. His face bore the pale sheen of panic, realizing that every judgment, every command to threaten George, was now on display, not just to the staff, but to the customers and by extension, the entire corporate hierarchy. Jonathan rose slightly, his eyes still on George. "We'll handle this," he said firmly, almost to himself, but loud enough for others to hear. "You'll be safe. And you'll get the help and respect you deserve." George's gaze, frail but slowly awakening, met Jonathan's. For a brief moment, the fog in his mind lifted, like a thin curtain being drawn back. Fragments of memory stirred, the boardroom, the offices, the meetings, the decisions he had made decades ago. And amidst that clarity, he recognized something else. He was being treated with a reverence he had been denied for too long. The lobby, which had been a stage for mockery, suspicion, and panic, became still. The moment hung suspended, fragile but profound. And at the center, George Thompson, trembling but alive, stood on the cusp of recognition, not just from the bank and its staff, but from the world he had built and had been forced to abandon. The commotion that had seemed unstoppable moments ago had paused, waiting for the next steps, for the truth to fully unfold. And for George, for Jonathan, and for everyone in the room, that next step was just beginning. The lobby remained frozen in disbelief, the cacophony of moments ago replaced by stunned silence. Phones lowered slowly, eyes widened, and whispers that had once questioned George's sanity now faltered into incredulous murmurs. Staff and customers alike stared at the frail man clutching his crumpled slip of paper, realizing that the man they had mocked and feared for minutes, or what seemed like hours, was far from ordinary. William Brow's confident posture faltered. His jaw tightened, lips pressed together as if trying to hold back words that would betray his panic. Sweat beaded along his hairline, and his carefully maintained composure crumbled under the weight of what Jonathan Hale had just revealed. His voice, once booming and confident, now trembled. I didn't. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes darting around the room. The staff's eyes were on him, accusatory. Customers, who had moments ago laughed or muttered behind their hands, now watched with disbelief, their phones abandoned in pockets or purses as though the gravity of the truth had frozen every action. Jonathan Hale raised a hand, commanding attention without raising his voice. Calm, deliberate, his presence cut through the residual tension like a knife. "This man," he said, gesturing to George, "is not merely a client. He is the CEO and majority owner of Dominion Financial Group, the parent company that owns this branch and every institution under its name. The alert that froze your system? That is standard for his account. For him alone." The words landed like a thunderclap. A young teller, the one who had entered George's account number, began to shake uncontrollably. Tears welled in her eyes as the enormity of the situation sank in. She had done nothing wrong, yet the scene she had helped set in motion now twisted into a revelation far beyond her comprehension. She clutched the counter edge as if holding herself upright against the tidal wave of guilt, shock, and awe. Customers who had laughed or mocked moments earlier scrambled, fumbling with their phones. Some attempted to hide recordings, deleting files hastily, while others looked anywhere but at George, as if their eyes would betray them if they lingered too long. Their whispered apologies or frantic comments were drowned by the almost sacred hush settling over the marble-floored lobby. George, meanwhile, remained at the center of it all, trembling, uncertain, his mind flickering like a failing light. The Alzheimer's that shadowed his thoughts tangled his comprehension of the situation. His hands clenched the crumpled slip of paper as though it could anchor him, but the world around him felt unreal, a dreamscape of luxury, accusation, and sudden recognition. What? His words stumbled, fragmented, incoherent even to his own ears. Memories floated past in fragments, boardroom tables, stacks of documents, the echo of a gavel in meetings long forgotten, voices of colleagues he could not place, all dissolving into the now, the marble, the murmurs, the glare of crystal chandeliers, and the panicked face of a man named William Brow. Jonathan knelt beside him, steadying a trembling hand on George's shoulder. "Sir," he said softly, almost reverently, "we've been searching for you for months. You are here now. You are safe. You are being recognized for who you truly are." He gestured toward the crowd with a brief nod. "Everyone will know the truth in a moment." William Brow's composure unraveled completely. He stammered, attempted excuses that fell flat, and laughed nervously, the sound hollow and unconvincing. I didn't know. I thought," his voice caught, swallowed by the collective gaze of staff, customers, and the authority embodied by Jonathan Hale. I was only following protocol." Jonathan's gaze remained unyielding. "Protocol?" he asked evenly. "Protocol is not a license for humiliation. It is certainly not a justification for treating the CEO of your own company as a criminal. Look at him. Look at what you have done." George's eyes met Jonathan's briefly. Something flickered, a spark of recognition, a trace of identity stirring through the fog of memory. The tactile familiarity of the crumpled paper, the sound of Jonathan's voice, the sudden gravity of acknowledgement, it all converged in a momentary awakening. He whispered faintly, almost to himself, I used to." Jonathan gestured for a nearby chair, offering it gently to George. "Sit," he said. "Here, take a breath. Drink some water." A staff member rushed forward with a small bottle, helping George to steady himself as he lowered into the seat, hands still gripping the paper like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Jonathan reached for his phone. He dialed headquarters with swift precision. "We found him. He's here." "He's alive," he said, voice steady, but carrying the gravity of months of searching and worry. On the other end, commands and personnel began mobilizing immediately, understanding the urgency and sensitivity of the discovery. The crowd, still reeling, began to murmur again, but now in hushed tones of reverence, confusion, and disbelief. Customers and staff alike watched as the frail man in rags, once subject to scorn and suspicion, was treated with care and respect. His presence had transformed the atmosphere. Fear gave way to awe, ridicule to shame, and whispers to careful observation. George blinked, the fog in his mind flickering uncertainly. Recognition danced at the edges of memory, offices, chairs, polished floors, not unlike these marble tiles, faces of executives he once commanded, documents he had signed, decisions he had made. The juxtaposition of the present moment and his fragmented recollection created a strange dissonance, an emotional turbulence that left him shaking, yet grounded by Jonathan's calm presence. Jonathan leaned slightly closer, voice low and reassuring. "You've been found, sir. The company is mobilizing. They will respect you. They will protect you. You are no longer invisible, George." The lobby had quieted almost completely. Only the distant hum of air conditioning and the occasional gasp punctuated the silence. William Brow shrank, defeated, realizing his authority had evaporated under the weight of truth. Staff exchanged glances of disbelief, some whispering apologies to George as he settled into the chair, trembling but dignified. In that moment, the Argent Trust Bank lobby ceased to be merely a place of transactions. It became a theater of revelation, a stage on which justice, recognition, and the raw power of truth had begun to play out. And at its center, George Thompson, frail, confused, yet undeniably himself, sat, holding the last tangible piece of his identity, ready to begin a journey of rediscovery, surrounded by those who were only just beginning to understand who he truly was. The street outside the Argent Trust Bank erupted in sudden motion. A convoy of black SUVs, their windows darkened to near opacity, rolled to a slow, precise stop along the curb. Tires hissed over wet asphalt, engines murmuring with authority. Within moments, uniformed corporate security personnel emerged, their faces set in professional neutrality, their presence commanding without speaking a word. Behind them, men and women in tailored suits, executives from Dominion Financial Group headquarters, stepped forward, each carrying an air of purpose and urgency. Inside the lobby, the tension that had frozen the crowd moments ago shifted into a new, tangible electricity. Staff scrambled instinctively, pulling registers closed, straightening counters, whispering frantic instructions to one another. Phones were lowered, attempts to record replaced by bewilderment and awe. William Brow, still in his tan suit, remained frozen near the entrance, his mouth slightly agape, eyes flicking to the arriving SUVs and then back to the frail man in the chair. Fear had replaced arrogance. The doors swung open again, and a team of medical personnel moved quickly but gently toward George. One nurse, gloved and calm, knelt beside him, holding a small bottle of water and a blanket. George flinched instinctively, confusion tightening his brow. The tactile presence of hands and voices he did not recognize triggered fragments of memory and fear, the remnants of streets, strangers, and cold nights pressing against him. "Mr. Thompson, sir," a firm voice called, cutting through the murmurs of staff and customers. The regional director of the bank stepped forward, tall and confident, a calm authority radiating from him. He surveyed the room, eyes flicking to William, to the staff, to George, and back to the arriving team. "We are here to assist you, to ensure your safety, and to help you regain control of your day, your life, and your company." George blinked, eyes wide. He had never heard words spoken to him with such deference. The tone, the formality, the sheer recognition, it was disorienting, almost overwhelming. His hands trembled on the crumpled paper, clutching it as if it were the only tangible thread to his life before the fog of illness had taken over. A customer, barely able to contain disbelief, whispered to another, He owns this place? Him." Their voice trembled, curiosity and awe mingled with shame. Another covered their mouth with both hands, eyes darting between George and the arriving executives. The lobby, once a place of mundane transactions and casual scrutiny, had transformed into a stage of revelation, spectators watching a man reclaim his truth. The medical team moved closer. One nurse gently guided George's trembling hands to rest on his lap, checking for any visible injuries or signs of distress. A paramedic crouched beside him, measuring his pulse while keeping his voice soft and reassuring. "You're safe, sir," she said. "We're just making sure you're comfortable. You don't need to worry about anything else right now." George flinched slightly at the attention, confusion flickering across his features, but he remained seated, absorbing each careful movement like a child learning to trust again. William Brow attempted to step backward toward the corner of the lobby, seeking invisibility, a way to distance himself from the consequences that now loomed over him. Jonathan Hale's sharp voice stopped him. "Stay where you are," he commanded, eyes locked on the manager. "No one moves until this is resolved." William froze, realizing for the first time that he no longer held power here. Control had shifted entirely. At the same moment, a security officer approached one of the lobby terminals. Fingers danced over the keyboard, and within seconds, live footage from every camera in the bank was pulled up. William's movements, his mocking expressions, the gestures that had humiliated George, all were replayed on the screens. The footage sprawled across monitors like evidence in a courtroom, unflinching and unedited. Staff gasped. Some turned away, unable to meet the clarity of the visual record. George's attention wavered, flickering between the monitors and the new arrivals. Faces blurred in and out of memory. Executives he once knew, security personnel whose presence now signified protection rather than threat, and Jonathan Hale, the steady figure who had recognized him before anyone else. Recognition and fear, past and present, collided in his mind. He leaned slightly forward, peering at the screens, trying to make sense of the familiar and the alien intertwined. A junior executive approached, kneeling to meet George's eye level, voice gentle but firm. "Sir, we will ensure your every need is attended to. Medical evaluation, security, and personal assistance, all arranged. You are our priority." George nodded slightly, though his lips trembled, and a faint sigh escaped as though he were beginning to release the tension coiled tight around his chest for hours. The lobby, now saturated with executives, security personnel, medical staff, and witnesses, had transformed into a controlled chaos. Every movement was measured, yet the weight of authority and care was unmistakable. George, seated in the center, felt the convergence of attention, protection, and acknowledgement. He was no longer invisible, no longer a subject of ridicule. Every action around him underscored a single truth. He belonged here, not as a supplicant or a curiosity, but as the man who had built it all. William Brow's face had turned pale, his earlier confidence reduced to nervous shifting and muttered excuses. Staff exchanged glances, some still processing the dramatic reversal of events. The security officer securing the footage nodded to Jonathan Hale, who gave a slight, approving tilt of his head. Every piece of the lobby, the observers, the participants, the equipment, was now aligned in recognition of the reality. George Thompson was not merely a client or a wanderer. He was the owner, the man of consequence, and the center of authority in a world that had momentarily forgotten him. George lowered his gaze to the crumpled slip of paper in his hands, the last tangible relic of his previous life. Around him, voices of respect, urgency, and care merged into a singular current of stability. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to breathe, the tremor in his hands slowing slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing, even if only marginally. The lobby had changed. The balance of power had shifted. And at the center of it, frail but undeniable, George Thompson sat as the axis around which every eye, every decision, and every future movement now turned. The lobby, once a stage of chaos, had transformed into an arena of judgment. The regional director, standing near the center, watched the live security footage unfold on the large screens. Each frame told a story of cruelty, ignorance, and prejudice. George Thompson mocked, sneered at, and dehumanized. Racist insults hung in the air like thick smoke, mingling with the clamor of disbelief and fear. False accusations were strewn across the marble floors as if written in neon. A man judged for the clothes he wore, for the thinness of his frame, for the chaos of a mind that had wandered for decades. William Brow's figure appeared repeatedly on the screens, his laughter sharp and mocking, his gestures dismissive and cruel, his order to arrest a man who had only asked to see his account. The evidence, unfiltered and unyielding, left no room for doubt. For once, the polished veneer of authority could not obscure the ugliness beneath. Executives, gathered now in deliberate formation, approached William. Their steps were measured, the kind of deliberate pacing that commands attention and signals inevitability. They stopped before him, blocking his path, a silent but unyielding wall of accountability. Staff and customers froze in place, their eyes locked on the unfolding confrontation. The lobby, previously a place of commerce, had become a courtroom, the witnesses unable to look away, yet aware that justice was about to play out in real time. William's face, once a mask of arrogance, betrayed panic. He opened his mouth, stammering, grasping for excuses that had no weight under the scrutiny of the room. I didn't know. I was just following protocol." His hands shook as he gestured toward George, as if pointing could absolve him of the truth now illuminated on every screen. "Standard procedure. He looked dangerous." Jonathan Hale stepped forward, voice calm but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "He looked homeless, So you assumed criminal? That is your protocol? To mock, to accuse, to humiliate a man based on appearance and circumstance. His words hung in the air, precise and undeniable, each syllable a judgment against the manager who had once felt untouchable. The room held its breath. Customers who had laughed, whispered, and recorded now lowered their heads, ashamed. Their phones, once raised in the thrill of mockery, were now mere reminders of their complicity. Staff, some of whom had avoided intervention out of fear, now watched as the power dynamic shifted completely. William's authority, built on performative superiority and fear, was dissolving before them. The regional director gestured toward the screens. Every motion, every gesture William had made toward George was replayed in stark clarity, the scoffs, the eye rolls, the loud proclamations of assumed guilt. Each frame spoke for itself. "This is not protocol," the director said evenly, eyes locked on William. "This is discrimination. This is harassment. This is a violation of every standard of conduct we uphold. Explain yourself." William's voice faltered, words tripping over one another. I thought he was. He triggered the CEO alert, yes, but it must have been a mistake. His sentence collapsed under the weight of everyone's gaze, under the relentless documentation of the footage, under the undeniable truth that the man he had tormented was not only innocent but far more powerful than anyone present had realized. Jonathan leaned closer, not to threaten but to clarify. "You humiliated him. You called security on him. You accused him publicly. All because he looked like someone you could dismiss. You assumed a man who had once been at the pinnacle of this organization was nothing. How does that reflect on you? On this institution?" The air in the lobby vibrated with tension. William's stomach churned as realization sank in. His career, once a series of carefully cultivated victories and impressions of control, was collapsing in plain view. There was no backroom negotiation, no secret to hide behind. Every laugh, every snide remark, every dismissive gesture had been captured. Every witness was now part of the tribunal. Customers who had mocked George now shifted uncomfortably, some averting their gaze entirely. The realization of their complicity, the discomfort of watching someone's power be stripped from them in real time, weighed heavily. Their previous amusement was replaced with shame, an awkward and stinging acknowledgement that the world could be cruel, and that they had enjoyed the cruelty vicariously. The regional director's voice rang again, cutting through the whispers and the heavy tension. "William Brow, your conduct is under immediate review. Internal affairs will determine your fate. Your suspension is effective immediately, and further disciplinary action will follow. You will not leave this lobby until this process is complete." William's shoulders slumped slightly, his mask of control slipping entirely. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. His breath was shallow, rapid, as if the room itself had constricted around him. The audience, the staff, the customers, the executives, watched the humiliation unfold, witnessing the reversal of fortune that George had never asked for but had earned through circumstance and recognition. George, seated and still trembling, glanced around the room. The tension, the confrontation, the authority of those who had arrived to protect him, it all pressed against the fog of his memory. He felt the contrast of fear and relief, humiliation and vindication, coiling in his chest. He did not yet fully comprehend the implications, but the sense that the tide had turned, that the room now recognized him as more than a shadow of himself, reached deep inside him. The lobby had become a courtroom in every sense. Judgment was delivered not through formal procedure alone, but through clarity, evidence, and the unflinching acknowledgement of right and wrong. The space vibrated with the significance of the moment, an undeniable shift in authority and morality, witnessed by every eye present. William Brow, once untouchable within these walls, now stood exposed, powerless, and accountable. The executives, guided by the regional director and reinforced by Jonathan's presence, prepared to formalize the consequences. The tension peaked, poised on the edge of finality as the room waited for the next step, the official reckoning, the action that would cement the truth of what had just transpired. The lobby, marble and glass and high ceilings, had become a theater of justice. At its center sat George Thompson, fragile but unbowed, a man whose dignity had been challenged, whose identity had been questioned, yet whose truth now radiated through every corner of the room. And all around him, the spectators, employees, customers, and the very system he once led, witnessed the collapse of prejudice and the quiet restoration of recognition. William Brow's steps echoed hollowly against the marble floor as he was escorted toward the glass-walled manager's office. His once commanding presence felt smaller now, diminished under the weight of scrutiny and the knowledge that the entire lobby had witnessed his failings. Every whisper, every phone camera, every stunned gaze seemed to trail him like a shadow. The corridor leading to the office was lined with employees and customers who had watched his authority collapse. None dared to make eye contact, but all understood the reversal of power unfolding before them. Inside the office, two senior executives stood waiting, their posture rigid but composed. Jonathan Hale and the regional director flanked the doorway, silent but unmistakably in control. William's confidence, cultivated over decades of asserting dominance, flickered and dimmed. The executives gestured toward the main screen, which flickered to life, displaying every moment of his misconduct. The footage played slowly at first, William mocking George Thompson, the frail, trembling man who had wandered in asking only to see his account. Each gesture, the casual laughter, the exaggerated eye rolls, the sharp pointing at George as if he were a specimen, was captured in vivid clarity. The marble of the lobby, the glint of chandeliers, the faces of witnesses, all immortalized the cruelty that had passed unnoticed until now. William's face paled. His lips twitched. He opened his mouth, tried to interject, but no words would come. The laughter that once carried authority now looked grotesque, almost cartoonish, in its malice. He saw himself not as a manager maintaining order, but as a predator reveling in someone else's vulnerability. Jonathan stepped forward, voice calm but slicing through the tension like a sharpened blade. "Do you recognize yourself, Mr. Brow?" he asked evenly. "Do you see the man in these frames? The man who accused George Thompson, who humiliated him in front of colleagues and customers alike?" William swallowed hard, attempting a shake of the head, an instinctive denial, but the images left no room for equivocation. Each frame, each angle, each moment was undeniable. The executives' expressions did not soften. Accountability was already in motion. The regional director's voice added weight, methodical and unyielding. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. Your access credentials are revoked. Your badge is collected. Human Resources will formalize the termination process. Legal has been notified to review discriminatory misconduct. Every action you took that day will be examined and recorded. There will be no exceptions." William's hands rose in protest, a feeble shield against the momentum of consequence. "Wait, I didn't. It was protocol. Jonathan cut him off sharply. "Protocol does not excuse prejudice. Protocol does not excuse abuse. You assumed a man's intentions based on his appearance, his clothing, and the temporary confusion of his mind. That is not procedure. That is discrimination. That is misconduct." For the first time, William's composure crumbled entirely. His breathing quickened, sweat forming along his hairline. He attempted to pivot, to explain himself, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The office felt smaller, tighter, as the gravity of his downfall pressed from every angle. The executives, poised and unyielding, would allow no escape, no argument, no misdirection. Meanwhile, outside the office, George remained seated in the lobby. He rocked slightly, hands folded in his lap, watching the flurry of activity without fully understanding the scale of what was happening. Memory fragments flickered through his mind, an echo of boardrooms, the weight of signatures, the flick of a pen across a legal document, but they were incomplete, shards of a life almost lost. The contrast between his current frailty and the authority he once commanded was stark, yet he felt a sense of quiet relief as the man who had tormented him faced immediate consequence. Back in the office, William was escorted past employees and customers. Their gazes, previously a mix of deference and fear, now bore witness to his humiliation. Phones clicked, some recording, some merely capturing the moment. Colleagues who had once avoided confrontation now watched as the man who had lorded over them with arrogance was reduced to a shell of authority. Each step, each escorted movement mirrored the indignity he had forced upon George. "Keep your head up," one of the executives instructed the security detail. "Ensure he leaves without incident, but allow him to face what he has done." William's head bowed slightly, not in humility, but in the realization that his reputation, carefully constructed over decades, had unraveled in minutes. The lobby, once a place where he exercised control, now bore silent testimony to the reversal of fortune. Every whisper, every glance, every phone recording immortalized the moment of his corporate execution. As the glass doors closed behind him, the office and lobby quieted slightly, a hush settling over the space. The immediate threat of authority and intimidation had passed. George, still seated, felt the tension ease in the room. The rocking slowed, his hands unclenching. The sense of vindication, though incomplete and confused by the fog of memory, was palpable. For the first time in decades, the man who had once been dismissed and humiliated could observe justice being enacted. Jonathan approached George, voice soft but steady. "Everything is under control, sir," he said. "You are safe here. No one will harm you now." George nodded slowly, his mind attempting to reconcile the fragments of past and present. Faces, names, offices, and actions swirled in his memory, yet the clarity of the present, the undeniable truth of recognition, protection, and justice, began to anchor him, however tenuously. Outside the glass-walled office, William Brow's departure was complete. The once powerful manager had been reduced to a cautionary example. His career ended in a sequence of undeniable evidence, ethical enforcement, and public accountability. Inside the lobby, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The staff, executives, and customers absorbed the weight of what had occurred. George remained at the center, fragile but dignified, his presence a silent assertion of resilience, a reminder that power could be reclaimed not through dominance but through recognition of truth and integrity. The corporate execution had concluded. The consequences were immediate, visible, and instructive. And in the quiet aftermath, George Thompson, though still fragmented by memory and illness, could finally begin to reclaim the narrative of his life. The lobby had finally settled into an uneasy quiet. William Brow was gone, escorted from the building with every measure of public humiliation enforced. Phones were lowered, murmurs faded, and the remaining staff and customers lingered in stunned awe, whispering about the reversal of fortune they had just witnessed. In the center of it all, George Thompson sat in the leather chair Jonathan Hale had guided him to, rocking slightly, hands folded over his crumpled scrap of paper. He felt fragile, exposed, yet beneath the trembling surface, a flicker of something old, something familiar, stirred. Jonathan motioned to the regional director and two senior executives who had accompanied him. "Let's help him," he said softly. "Gently. He needs to remember, but on his terms." Small items were brought forward first. A framed photo of George standing beside the first bank he had acquired decades ago, his suit crisp, his smile confident, a polished pen engraved with his name, a stack of official letters from the early days of Dominion Financial Group, a leather-bound notebook filled with neat signatures and scribbled notes from meetings long past. The executives laid them carefully on a table within George's reach, each object a whisper from the past, a breadcrumb along the trail of memory. George's hands trembled as he reached toward the items, picking up the photograph first. His fingers brushed the frame, hesitant, as if fearing the memory might burn him. He stared at it, squinting, lips parting in a whisper. I remember this." His eyes darted around, seeking confirmation. Faces blurred, but fragments of recognition shimmered. The boardroom table, long and imposing, appeared in his mind's eye. The polished surface, the chairs arranged with exact precision. A pen he once gripped with certainty. Awards lining the wall, certificates of achievement he could almost recall accepting. A voice, familiar yet distant, giving a speech he had once delivered with pride and authority. Each fragment came in fits and starts, pieces of a puzzle scattered by years of illness and neglect. Jonathan knelt beside him, voice low, steady. "It's all here, sir," he said. "Every piece. You've built this. You've been here before. It's safe now." George closed his eyes, blinking rapidly, as if the motion could hold back the tide of returning awareness. His lips moved, forming words that were almost lost to the fog. I used to work here." Jonathan reached out gently, placing a hand on George's arm. "Yes, sir," he said softly, the words carrying warmth and weight. "Sir, you own here." The line hung in the air, simple yet transformative. George's eyes widened, a flicker of astonishment, relief, and confusion passing across his face. Recognition collided with disbelief, memory brushing up against the reality of the present. He inhaled sharply, gripping the photograph again as the weight of his past and present mingled, overwhelming yet grounding. Medical personnel approached, moving with care and precision. They were quiet, deliberate, aware that George was not merely a patient but a man of immense importance, temporarily lost in the haze of illness. One nurse gently took his arm to guide him, another adjusted a cushion behind his back to ensure comfort. Each movement was respectful, understated, designed to restore dignity rather than strip it away. George rose with effort, aided by Jonathan and the medical team. He rocked slightly on unsteady legs, eyes flitting across the lobby. The grandeur of the space, the marble floors, the chandeliers, the polished counters, sparked yet another fragment of memory. For a heartbeat, he almost recognized it as his domain, the place he had once overseen with precision and authority. Outside, the convoy of black SUVs that had arrived earlier waited patiently. The tinted windows reflected the sunlight, shielding the occupants from prying eyes. Jonathan guided George toward the first vehicle, supporting him at the elbow. Each step was measured, careful, ensuring that the weight of both his age and his fractured mind did not overwhelm him. As they approached the SUV, George paused and turned his gaze back toward the bank. The marble, the lobby, the glittering chandeliers, it all felt familiar, though not yet fully comprehensible. Recognition hovered at the edge of understanding. A faint smile brushed his lips, as if the space itself whispered reassurance. This was his world, in pieces, waiting for him to reclaim it. Jonathan stayed close, speaking softly, a constant anchor. "It's all right, sir. We're taking care of everything. You're safe now." George nodded slowly, his fingers still brushing the crumpled photograph in his hand. He stepped into the SUV, settling into the leather seat with careful guidance from the medical team. The door closed gently behind him, the vehicle's interior a cocoon of calm amid the storm of the day. He exhaled, a long, shivering release of tension that had accumulated over decades of misrecognition, humiliation, and confusion. Jonathan gave one last glance toward the bank before sliding into the passenger seat. "We'll take it slow," he assured George. "We'll help you remember. Piece by piece." Outside the tinted windows, the lobby receded. The marble and chandeliers, the staff and lingering customers, the echoes of laughter and accusation, everything was now a backdrop to the beginning of restoration. George's gaze lingered on the building one last time, a fragile recognition settling over him. Almost, but not quite fully, he remembered. Almost, but not yet. Inside the SUV, surrounded by medical support, careful guidance, and the quiet authority of Jonathan Hale, George Thompson began the slow, delicate process of reconnecting with the life that had nearly been lost. The fragments of identity, once scattered and obscured by illness, now had a chance to coalesce, one piece at a time, under the weightless protection of respect, care, and acknowledgement. The engine hummed softly as the SUV pulled away, leaving the lobby, and William Brow's humiliation behind. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the fragile reclaiming of a life that had been all but erased. Inside, George's mind, fragile but resilient, began to spark again. He whispered once more clearly this time, to no one in particular but to the truth itself, I remember something. By the time George Thompson was settled into the private care facility, the story had already exploded across every news outlet, social media platform, and financial bulletin. Headlines screamed in disbelief, "Homeless man mistreated at bank, turned out to be billionaire CEO." The world seemed unable to grasp the irony, the shock, or the injustice all rolled into one. Television anchors replayed clips from the lobby repeatedly, dissecting every second of George's humiliation and William Brow's cruel response. Protests erupted almost instantly. Groups of citizens gathered outside Argent Trust Bank, placards in hand, chanting against racism, classism, and elder abuse. The story had struck a nerve far beyond corporate walls. It was a public reckoning. Social media ignited with outrage, hashtags trending, debates erupting on every timeline. For once, a small, trembling man had commanded the attention of the world simply by being recognized for what he had always been. Inside Dominion Financial Group, the shockwaves were even more profound. The board convened emergency sessions, reviewing the events at the branch with a mix of horror and urgency. Internal memos, previously confidential, were circulated. All employees were to be reminded of the company's ethical responsibilities, with emphasis on treating vulnerable clients with respect and dignity. The first official response was swift. The company announced an immediate rollout of mandatory empathy training for every employee, from tellers to executives. Workshops were scheduled on understanding socio-economic challenges, mental health, and implicit bias. Anti-discrimination protocols were overhauled, strengthened, and publicized to ensure no one in the future would face the type of mistreatment George had endured. Additional protection protocols were put in place for elderly, disabled, and mentally ill individuals, ensuring that their interactions with any part of the bank were monitored with care and discretion. William Brow became the first cautionary tale. Within hours of the viral footage spreading, HR confirmed his termination, citing gross misconduct, discriminatory practices, and failure to follow even the most basic ethical standards. The story of his public humiliation became a corporate warning, a lesson in accountability, decorum, and the consequences of prejudice. Industry insiders and social commentators alike dissected his failures, turning him into a symbol of arrogance, ignorance, and unchecked authority. The teller who had first hesitated, the one who reluctantly entered George's account number, became a quiet hero behind the scenes. Witnessing the events unfold, he came forward as a whistleblower, providing investigators with testimony and context that highlighted the systemic negligence and the urgency of reform. His courage in speaking up brought additional scrutiny to the branch's operations, accelerating the review process and ensuring that protocols were revisited across the conglomerate. Jonathan Hale's recognition and decisive action did not go unnoticed. Within Dominion Financial Group, he was lauded for his foresight, calm under pressure, and the respect he afforded George in a moment that could have turned catastrophic. Media outlets interviewed him, portraying him as the man who had prevented both a personal tragedy and a corporate scandal. Yet Jonathan's focus remained on George, guiding him gently, ensuring the recovery was as dignified and unobtrusive as possible. Meanwhile, George's days were filled with gentle routines designed to spark memory and rebuild confidence. The care center was serene, quiet, and supportive, a stark contrast to the chaos he had endured just days prior. Each morning, he was shown photographs, small objects, and documents that reminded him of his life as a CEO. Slowly, fragments of meetings, speeches, and boardroom decisions returned. At first, these memories appeared as flashes, an office chair here, a pen there, the sound of his name called in reverence. Over time, the fragments began to coalesce, each spark illuminating more of the man he had once been. Staff treated him with patient respect, never rushing, never demanding. Medical personnel observed his progress carefully, tracking both his cognitive recovery and the emotional healing required after such a public humiliation. George was fragile, yes, but resilient. Each day brought small victories. A recollection of a conversation with a colleague, a faint smile remembering a successful acquisition, recognition of a city skyline he had helped transform with his financial influence. Weeks later, on a mild spring morning, George sat in the garden outside the care facility. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in soft gold. He held a photograph from years ago, a younger version of himself standing confidently outside the headquarters he had built. His hands, still trembling slightly, traced the edges of the frame as he studied the familiar face. I remember, he whispered, voice unsteady but growing stronger. His eyes glistened, the corners crinkling in faint recognition. I remember something. Jonathan stood nearby, offering a reassuring presence. The line had become iconic within the care facility and beyond, a statement not just of memory, but of restoration, of dignity regained. For George, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. A life reclaimed from the margins, one step at a time, one memory at a time. Outside the facility, the world continued to reel from the viral story, yet for George, the attention mattered less than the quiet certainty of being known, being recognized, and being restored. The press had moved on to the next scandal, the protests had subsided into routine activism, but within the garden's shaded corners, George found peace in fragments of his identity slowly knitting together. Every photograph, every document, every familiar object was a bridge back to himself. Every kind word from Jonathan, every careful gesture from the medical team, reinforced that he was seen, respected, and protected. The trauma of public humiliation, though not forgotten, had begun to fade beneath the warmth of recognition and restoration. And in that fragile, quiet moment, the world outside ceased to matter. George Thompson, once lost to illness, misfortune, and misunderstanding, allowed himself to breathe freely. The spark of identity, small but undeniable, flickered steadily, illuminating a future he had almost abandoned. He held the photograph a little closer, squinting in the sunlight. A faint smile appeared. I remember something. For the first time in decades, that was enough. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you believe no human being, no matter their appearance, status, or struggles, deserves to be humiliated the way George was, hit subscribe. Only those who excuse cruelty, who hide behind titles and authority to mistreat the vulnerable, would turn away from what happened here. Don't be like them. Subscribe if you stand for dignity and fairness. And if you believe every person deserves respect, whether billionaire or homeless, comment, justice matters. Don't side with people who abuse their power.